And welcome to our winter Bible study. This is our third session. We're doing a video and we're also having a conversation on Zoom. You are welcome to do that. Just let me know if you want the link to it. Put it in the comments below. I've titled this Bible study, They Say, You Say, I Say, as a way of getting at our self-talk. They say, what people say about us, what they say about our family, and how that is impressed upon us through our self-talk. You say is what God says. And then I say it's how we take God's words and apply them to our life and arrive at a spiritual and mature place. Today's Bible character appears after the Israelites have taken back the land of Canaan, after their long sojourn in Egypt from Joseph to Moses. They've been there 40 years and had quite a bit of peace, but now their land is being ravaged by the Midianites. Once a strong people, now they are a weak people. And the boy God calls to save his people believes he's the weakest of his clan, since he is the youngest in the household. He must be the weakest of the weak, he thinks. Do you know who we're going to study today? If you said Gideon, you are correct. This lesser-known Bible character deserves the spotlight today because he did go from being the weak one to the most spiritually mature in all the land. Most of the time in the book of Judges, where we'll be today, the leaders are doing evil in the sight of God. So God allows their enemies to overwhelm them. And this is what was happening just before we get the call of Gideon. We see this as the people are hiding in caves and crevices when the armies come in. And they just let them devastate their land, swarming over it like a bunch of locusts, eating everything, taking all their animals. It's quite a sight. And even threshing is happening in a wine press, kind of hidden away. But now God responds because they have called out for help. And God says, I brought you up from Egypt. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living, but you have not obeyed me. Can you feel the judgment? What do you think has made this people weak? Pagan worship, right? If it wasn't bad enough that every farm was ravaged and pilfered by the armies from the east, now God comes down on them strongly. And if we would stop there, we would think we'd have a very cruel God. But God does not rebuke without providing a way of salvation. So in verse 11, we hear, Then the Lord's messenger came and sat under the oak at Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizarite. Now, you might be wondering what an Abizarite is, and I'm glad you asked, because you need to know that whole family line, because that's where he feels the weakest of the weak, family lineage. Maybe you understand that too. So let's think this through. So Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and those boys were given a full heritage with the rest of Joseph's brothers. But because Joseph stayed in Egypt and his kids got their piece of land. But because they had an Egyptian father, the rest of Israel thought that they were like half tribes, not full tribes. So Manasseh, the firstborn, had a child by the name of Machir. And Machir fought with Deborah, the judge Deborah, and Balak in conquering the land back in Judges 5. And they were very successful. Machir had a son, Gilead, and a daughter, Hamekaleth. And Hamekaleth had 3 children, one of which was Abiezer. And it's from Abiezer, who has all these kids, and the last one's Gideon. So Gideon is an Abiezerite, and he feels that it's a weakness because he is the youngest son of a woman's inheritance that is only half a tribe. Now you can see where you get a little bit of a complex there. but it's to this young person that God calls. And you may wonder why, and it really happens quite often through the Bible. Why does God choose the youngest and the weakest and the most vulnerable to be his emissary of a message to the people? Not that Jesus was, but that others were. And we look at that frequently through the Bible. And this time, seriously, with the book, with Gideon's story in the book of Judges. Now, I'd like to read a little bit more after verse 11, when the messenger comes down. The Lord, in verse 12, the Lord messenger appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But Gideon replied to him, "With all due respect, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has this all happened to us? Where are all his amazing works that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, 'Didn't the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and allowed Midian to overpower us." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "You have strength, so go and rescue Israel from the power of Midian. I'm not personally sending you." But then Gideon says to him, "With all due respect, my Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my household." You know, that's the "they say" coming out of his mouth. But what is the "you say" that God is saying? Mighty warrior. Oh my goodness. I remember the Lauren Daigle song, "You say I am strong when I am feeling weak." And those lyrics are true for us, and certainly they're true for Gideon, that the strength of the Lord is what is supposed to be our strength, but we don't completely understand it. So Gideon's going to come to belief here, but he does it in a way that I really don't suggest, because he's testing God. But truthfully, God gets back at him and tests him again. So we've looked at a way of salvation, and we're going to, between these verses here, we're going to look at how Gideon changes his mind about God. And the first thing, when the messenger is still there, he says, if my offering is totally consumed, I will believe. And so he goes away and gets some meat and some unleavened bread, and he puts it on the rock there, and the meat is consumed in flames. And he goes, "Okay, I guess that's good enough for me." But it wasn't good enough for God, who said, "Okay, I need a sign of your obedience." And he tells Gideon that he must disassemble the pagan altar to Baal and assemble a new altar in the proper way on a ridge and sacrifice a bull up there. That's an expensive gift to God, but he does it at night because he's afraid of what the people will say. And sure enough, when the people woke up the next morning, they were very angry and wanted Gideon executed. Because not only did he sacrifice a bull, did they take down their altar of worship, he put a sign up on the ridge where all the enemies could see it, that there is a community down there who's trying to hide from them. But the dad says something very important. Joash says, "Do we have to do Baal's work for him? This is his altar. This is his problem. He can take care of it himself." And the people let Gideon go. That was very wise of the dad. But as Gideon goes on, he then comes to this shift in his spirituality. So we're in verse 34. It reads very simply, "The Lord's Spirit came over Gideon. And then he sounded a horn and summoned the Abiezrites to follow him." He felt a spiritual awakening, a full spiritual awakening, and then he realized this was his call. He sounded the horn and called his tribe to follow him, and they do. But then Gideon wants to test this new calling. So he's got this little trick that he's doing with God. He says, "Okay, if I put the fleece, the wool fleece," and not the fleeces that we know, but, you know, a pallet of wool on the threshing floor, overnight, and in the morning there's dew on top of it and it's dry underneath, then I'll believe that you have sent me to lead the people to salvation. So that happens, which you would not expect it not to happen. And then Gideon prays again to the Lord. He says, Lord, don't be angry at me. Can we just try this one more time? And this time, instead of the dew falling on top of the fleece, have it fall under the fleece. The fleece itself should be dry and the ground wet. Well, this is changing the laws of nature. We all know that dew falls on the top of things at night, not underneath them. But it did happen. God gave him a miracle, and it was a sign. But of course, that's not all that God wanted. So if God did a sign for Gideon, God wanted a sign back. And this was the sign. Gideon had to decrease the size of his army because there were several thousand, maybe even 10,000 people starting to follow him now. And he says, I want you to decrease the army to just 100 people. So Gideon does that, reduces the size of the army, and then they go to battle. And in this battle, they surround the army in a very familiar way. As, they surround them with trumpets and with torches that are under a glass jar. So, and probably not a clear glass jar, but a pot. And they go there and they break the pots, flash of light, blow their horn, and start marching into and among the people, scaring the living daylights out of them. And they win the battle. But the two kings flee with a few 15,000 people. So as they're fleeing, Gideon's marching on, and he runs into some family members. And so he has to do battle with his family at this point. So, so his family members are cousins from Manasseh's brother, so they're Ephraimites. So he runs into Ephraimites, and he's got to think back, okay, now what's my they say? I know God says I'm a mighty warrior, but if I act like a mighty warrior in front of my cousins, they're going to be angry. So they were already angry. And Gideon responds to their anger by saying, what have I done now compared to you? Aren't Ephraim's leftovers better than Abizar's main harvest? See what he's saying? We're stupid farmers here. We're not as good as you. God handed you the Midianite officers, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do compared to you? Where do you think Gideon is here with his self-confidence? He might be halfway up there, just remembering very strongly what he's supposed to be doing with the they say. So he goes on in battle. And before he finishes, he's chasing these kings. And he does conquer them, even though they're a larger army than him. He conquers them, and then the kings fly off, and he chases after them, and he gets the kings. And as he's coming back through the hillside, he runs across the people that he met on the way there, who he asked for food, and they wouldn't give him food. So here he is, bringing the kings back, and he says, you guys were so stupid not to feed us. Here are your kings. I am the most powerful. God is on my side. And now we're going to execute these kings in front of you. And he tries to delegate it to his oldest son, who is so totally afraid and unable to do it. He's not mature enough to take this on challenge. And so Gideon gets up there and he says, okay, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to stand up. And he slashes the kings and takes their symbols of authority off their camels. That's why the name Gideon means slasher. Side fact, fun fact there. But also this whole thing that Gideon has done, this final act of war in carrying out this act by himself and not delegating it out, makes him the strongest character and invited to be king of all Israel. And he refuses because he doesn't want to be king. But they set him up as judge or prophet, leading the people into continuing in the way of God's. Now this is remembered all throughout the Bible. So in the prophet Isaiah recalls he's looking forward to the Messiah, what the Messiah is going to do when the Messiah comes to save them, and says, don't you remember how God saved us through the sea by holding up the sword? And don't you remember what happened with the Midianites? Yes, it's remembered. And all through the Bible, whenever you hear the Bible say, as in the day of Midian, as in the day of Midian, they're recalling how Gideon, through his faith in God, saved the people. Also, our New Testament book, from Hebrews 11, verses 32 and 33, we have another remembrance of Gideon's faith. And the writer says, what more can I say? I would run out of time if I told you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Through faith, they conquered kingdoms, brought about justice, realized promises, shut the mouths of lions, put out raging fires, escaped from the edge of the sword, found strength in weakness, were mighty in war, and routed out foreign armies. What an amazing list of characters that Gideon has been put into. No longer weak, but remembered from being strong. May it also be said so of us, that we believe in the strength of God over what people say about us. Thank you for joining with me today in this very important lesson of overcoming our self-talk. I hope you can join with us on Saturday at 9 a.m. on our Zoom conversation. Next week, we'll look at another famous woman of the Bible, whom I call Always Bitter. I'll see you then.